Olivia Bennett, an 18-year-old TikTok star with millions of followers, stabbed her boyfriend Jamal Phillips multiple times in their Miami, Florida apartment, killing him after an argument about her fabricated online persona. The brutal attack occurred in the early evening hours of March 15th in their 15th floor luxury high-rise overlooking Biscayne Bay, where neighbors would later report hearing shouting and screams that echoed through the building's sleek hallways. Blood spatter analysis would show that the first strike caught Jamal by surprise as he sat on their white leather couch, followed by several more frenzied stab wounds as he attempted to escape toward the balcony. The gleaming knife, a 7-inch chef's blade from their kitchen, was later found partially cleaned in the bathroom sink, with traces of blood still visible in the drain. If you're watching this video, make sure to hit subscribe and join our true crime community right now. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from as we dive deeper into this shocking case that shook the social media world to its core. The sun was setting over Miami's iconic skyline when the violence erupted, casting an orange glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of apartment 1502, a space that had been the backdrop for countless couple goals TikTok videos that had made Olivia a social media sensation. The polished concrete floors, minimalist furniture, and carefully curated aesthetic that had served as the perfect Instagram setting became splattered with Jamal's blood. The stark contrast between the manufactured perfection of their online lives and the brutal reality of their relationship finally converging in a moment of lethal rage. Security cameras in the lobby captured Olivia leaving the building at 7:42 p.m., her white designer sundress now bearing faint red stains that she attempted to conceal with a light jacket. Despite the warm Miami evening, her face composed, but her eyes darting nervously as she nodded to the doorman. She would return 3 hours later with shopping bags as though nothing had happened, but by then Jamal's body had already begun to cool as Miami's notorious humidity seeped through the slightly ajar balcony door. The luxury apartment complex, the Azura, was home to young professionals, international investors, and aspiring influencers drawn to Miami's glamorous image and vibrant social scene. The building's sound-dampening construction, normally a selling point for privacy-conscious residents, had muffled most of the sounds of the struggle, allowing only the loudest screams to reach neighboring units. Jamal's final moments played out against the backdrop of a city known for its beautiful facades concealing darker truths, a parallel to the couple's own carefully constructed online presence that masked a deteriorating relationship fraught with jealousy and control. Security footage would later show that no one else entered or exited their apartment between the time Jamal was last seen alive entering the building at 5:23 p.m. and the discovery of his body the following morning, eliminating any possibility that an intruder was responsible for the crime. As night fell over Miami, Olivia methodically worked to erase evidence of what had occurred, changing clothes, attempting to clean blood from the tile grout, and disposing of her bloody outfit in a dumpster 6 blocks away. She made several phone calls that evening, none to emergency services, but instead to her content manager and brand partnership coordinator, conversations that would later prove crucial to establishing her state of mind. Miami's famous Ocean Drive continued its nightly transformation into a neon-lit playground for tourists and locals alike, completely unaware that just a few blocks away, a young woman was calculating how to spin the death of her boyfriend into a narrative that wouldn't damage her carefully cultivated brand. The city's reputation for surface-level beauty masking darker undercurrents proved eerily appropriate, as Olivia posted a seemingly carefree selfie from her balcony at 10:38 p.m., the same balcony where hours earlier Jamal had gasped his final breath while reaching for help that would never come. The relationship between Olivia and Jamal had begun 18 months earlier, blossoming quickly into content that drove Olivia's follower count, from respectable to stratospheric. Their meet-cute story, shared and reshared across platforms, described a chance encounter at a Miami beach where Jamal, allegedly playing his guitar for friends, caught Olivia's eye and inspired her to approach him with a spontaneous dance that became their first viral video together. The reality, as friends would later testify, was a calculated connection through a mutual acquaintance who worked in influencer marketing, specifically arranged to pair Olivia with someone who could help elevate her content beyond solo dance videos and fashion hauls. Their first 6 months together produced a 400% increase in Olivia's engagement metrics, landing her deals with fashion brands, energy drinks, and eventually her own makeup line, all built around the narrative of young, beautiful love in paradise. Their content portrayed them as the perfect couple: spontaneous beach dates, surprise gifts, heartfelt messages, and carefully choreographed moments of affection that generated millions of views. Behind the scenes, text messages would reveal a different story: scheduled filming sessions, repeated takes to capture authentic moments, and increasingly tense arguments about Jamal's reluctance to participate in what he called manufactured moments. The pressure of maintaining this illusion intensified as Olivia's following grew, bringing lucrative partnership deals that explicitly referenced their relationship in the contracts and required minimum monthly content featuring both of them. Jamal, whose own passion was music production, had initially seen the social media presence as a stepping stone to promote his work, but increasingly felt commodified and uncomfortable with the fabricated nature of their online narrative, a discomfort he had recently begun expressing to close friends. The breaking point came 3 days before the murder, when Jamal told Olivia he wanted out, not just from the relationship, but from the fake life they were presenting online. According to text messages recovered from his phone, he had reached his limit with pretending and wanted to pursue his music career with integrity, even telling Olivia he was considering making a public statement about the reality behind their curated content. Her response, initially pleading and then increasingly threatening, demonstrated her panic at the prospect of losing both her relationship-leveraging content and potentially the brand deals that now constituted over 80% of her income. What Jamal couldn't have known was just how far Olivia would go to prevent her carefully constructed world from collapsing when he arrived at their apartment that fateful evening to collect some of his belongings. What initially appeared to be another domestic dispute in the glamorous but often troubled Miami social scene would soon unravel into something far more reflective of a new kind of crime unique to the digital age. The traditional elements were familiar to investigators: a knife, a body, a suspect with motive and opportunity. But the evidence that would ultimately prove most damning was entirely modern: an accidental TikTok live broadcast that captured critical audio of the attack. Miami, with its contradictory nature as both a paradise of sunshine and a city with a long history of violence and vice, provided the perfect backdrop for a crime that similarly juxtaposed the glossy, filtered world of social media fame with the raw, unfiltered reality of human jealousy, desperation, and rage. As dawn broke over Biscayne Bay the next morning, the golden light illuminating the luxurious apartment now turned crime scene, first responders would discover not just Jamal's body, but the digital breadcrumbs that would lead investigators straight to his killer. Jamal Phillips was far more than just the handsome accessory he had been reduced to in Olivia Bennett's carefully curated social media feed. Born and raised in Atlanta to a family deeply rooted in the music industry, his father a sound engineer and his mother a former backup singer, Jamal had been surrounded by creative energy from his earliest days. He had moved to Miami 2 years earlier at age 18, drawn by the city's vibrant music scene and the prestigious production program at the University of Miami's Frost School of Music, where professors described him as exceptionally talented and genuinely innovative in his approach to blending traditional R&B elements with modern electronic production. His classmates remembered a generous collaborator who freely offered his technical expertise to help others refine their projects, never too busy to listen to a rough mix or suggest a subtle improvement that might elevate a track from good to exceptional. The portfolio of work he had been building, collaborations with local Miami artists, original compositions, and innovative remixes, showed a young man on the cusp of establishing himself in a competitive industry, with several small production credits already to his name, and a growing reputation among South Florida's music community. Jamal's apartment, which became Olivia's content backdrop after she moved in 6 months into their relationship, had originally been a creative space reflecting his musical passions. Friends who visited before Olivia's influence described walls lined with vinyl records, vintage instruments, and sound equipment that gradually disappeared to make room for the minimalist aesthetic that performed better on social media. His dream, shared countless times with friends and family, was to open Soundwave Studios, his own recording space that would cater to up-and-coming artists who might not otherwise have access to professional production. The business plan found on his laptop detailed a community-focused approach that would offer sliding scale rates and free sessions to promising talents from underprivileged backgrounds. Reflecting Jamal's belief that the music industry needed more diversity of voices and experiences, his mother would later tell the court through tears, "My son saw music as a way to bring people together, to give voice to those who aren't always heard," the exact opposite of what happened to him, silenced forever, because he wanted authenticity in his life. The real Jamal stood in stark contrast to the performative version seen in Olivia's content, where he was portrayed as little more than a prop, the attentive boyfriend, the generous gift giver, the admiring gaze just off camera. His own social media presence was modest and music-focused, sharing works in progress, studio sessions, and thoughtful commentary on industry trends rather than personal moments or relationship content. The disparity between his authentic online presence and his scripted appearances in Olivia's content became a point of increasing tension between them, as evidenced by text messages in which he expressed feeling like a character in a show I never auditioned for. His friends noticed his growing discomfort with the artifice, describing how he would change the subject when Olivia's social media success came up, or winced slightly when strangers approached them in Miami's restaurants or clubs to compliment their relationship goals content. One close friend recounted a conversation just weeks before his death where Jamal admitted, "I feel like I'm losing myself in her fantasy world, man, and the worst part is millions of people think that's really me." In the vibrant cultural melting pot of Miami, Jamal had found his community among fellow musicians and producers, spending late nights in small studios across the city's diverse neighborhoods from Wynwood to Little Haiti. While Olivia documented their supposed date nights at trendy South Beach establishments for her followers, Jamal would often slip away afterward to underground music venues or impromptu jam sessions where he felt truly alive and connected. His professor at the Frost School of Music described him as a bridge builder between Miami's different music scenes, someone who moved easily between the polished commercial world of Miami Beach and the raw creative energy of the city's less Instagram-friendly neighborhoods. The friends who knew him in these authentic moments described someone thoughtful and ambitious, with plans to incorporate Miami's rich multicultural sounds into his production style: Afro-Cuban rhythms, Haitian compa influences, and Dominican dembo beats alongside contemporary hip-hop and R&B. Beyond his musical talents, Jamal was remembered for his quiet generosity and genuine interest in others, qualities that rarely translated to the carefully staged giving back moments captured for Olivia's content. The owner of a small coffee shop near the university recalled how Jamal would pay for studio time for younger students who couldn't afford it, never mentioning it to anyone, but insisting the shop owner keep his identity anonymous. His academic advisor spoke of his mentorship of freshman students, particularly those from backgrounds underrepresented in music production, offering technical guidance and encouragement without seeking recognition. In an industry and a city where so many people are focused on being seen, Jamal was focused on being genuine, she told detectives investigating his murder. He cared more about the impact of his actions than how those actions might look to others, a rarity in today's social media landscape and particularly unusual in Miami's image-conscious environment. As investigators pieced together Jamal's final days, they discovered a young man preparing to reclaim his authentic life, even at the cost of the glamorous facade he had been part of creating. His browser history showed research on how to respectfully end relationships and how to navigate potential social media backlash, suggesting he was trying to find the most ethical way to extricate himself from both the relationship and its online performance. Notes in his phone detailed points he wanted to make when talking to Olivia, emphasizing that his decision wasn't about her personally, but about his need for authenticity and his discomfort with selling a fake relationship to impressionable followers. The final entry, dated the morning of his death, read simply, "Today I choose my real self over the fictional version of me, whatever the consequences." These private words, never shared online but discovered in the investigation, perhaps captured the essence of who Jamal Phillips truly was. Someone ultimately unwilling to compromise his integrity for views, likes, or financial gain, a value system that put him directly at odds with Olivia's priorities. In the days following his murder, a different picture of Jamal emerged as friends shared memories on social media and at a memorial service held at a small recording studio he had frequented in Miami's Wynwood Arts District. Absent were the perfectly lit photos and carefully worded captions that had characterized his presence in Olivia's feed, replaced instead by candid snapshots of him hunched over mixing boards, laughing with friends over takeout containers during late-night recording sessions, or deep in conversation with local artists about their work. The genuine outpouring of grief from Miami's music community revealed the profound disconnect between the two-dimensional boyfriend character presented to millions of followers and the three-dimensional human being who had touched so many lives through his passion, talent, and sincerity. In Miami's MacArthur Causeway Park, where Jamal had often gone to compose or simply watch the ships pass by for inspiration, friends gathered for an impromptu jam session in his honor, playing original music he had produced and sharing stories that never made it to any platform but existed in the authentic relationships he had cultivated. The 911 call came in at 8:37 a.m., the caller's voice shaking as she described finding her neighbor's door slightly ajar and seeing blood everywhere when she peered inside after her repeated knocks went unanswered. "I think someone's hurt really bad in apartment 1502, the woman told the dispatcher, explaining that she had become concerned when she heard a phone repeatedly ringing and chiming with notifications from inside the unit for over an hour. Miami Police Department officers responded within minutes, their patrol cars pulling up to the Azura's gleaming entrance where the building's flustered manager waited to escort them upstairs, apologizing repeatedly as if the crime somehow reflected poorly on the property's exclusive image. The first officers on scene, moving carefully through the apartment with weapons drawn, discovered Jamal Phillips's body on the balcony, multiple stab wounds to his torso, and defensive wounds on his hands and arms, indicating he had fought desperately for his life. The sliding glass door was partially open, suggesting he had been trying to escape to the balcony, perhaps hoping to call for help from neighboring units, or possibly even contemplating the desperate 15-story drop as preferable to the attack he was enduring. Lead Detective Isaiah Harris arrived 30 minutes later, by which time the apartment had been secured and the initial evidence documentation was underway. A veteran of Miami-Dade's homicide unit with 15 years of experience, Harris had seen his share of domestic violence turned deadly. But something about this scene immediately struck him as calculated rather than impulsive. The bathroom was too clean, he would later testify, noting that while blood had been partially cleaned from the kitchen and living room, creating smeared patterns consistent with hasty cleanup attempts, the bathroom had been meticulously scrubbed with strong cleaning products whose scent still lingered in the air. The kitchen knife block had an empty slot corresponding to the weapon found in the bathroom sink, a 7-inch chef's knife with traces of blood still visible in the handle's crevices, despite apparent cleaning attempts. Most telling to Harris was the victim's phone, found under the coffee table with its screen shattered, while the suspect's charging station was empty, suggesting she had taken her device when leaving, a detail that often indicated premeditation rather than panic in Harris's experience investigating homicides in Miami's image-conscious communities. As crime scene technicians methodically processed the apartment, photographing blood spatter patterns and collecting samples, a neighbor from across the hall approached one of the officers maintaining the perimeter with information that would dramatically accelerate the investigation. "I heard a TikTok notification sound, really loud, then screaming, and what sounded like things breaking," the young woman explained, referencing the distinctive sound effect that plays when a user goes live on the platform. "It was around 7 p.m., and I remember thinking it was weird because usually they're so quiet when they're filming their videos." This seemingly minor detail immediately caught Detective Harris's attention, as it potentially placed Olivia Bennett, already the primary person of interest due to the domestic nature of the scene, at the apartment during the estimated time of death. The timestamp of this potential digital evidence aligned with the medical examiner's preliminary assessment that Jamal had been killed between 6:30 and 7:30 p.m. the previous evening, based on body temperature and the early stages of rigor mortis observed at the scene. The investigation took a crucial turn when Detective Harris, acting on the neighbor's information, requested an emergency preservation order for any TikTok live broadcasts associated with Olivia Bennett's account from the previous evening. TikTok's legal team responded within hours, confirming that a live broadcast had indeed been initiated from Bennett's account at 6:58 p.m. the previous day, lasting only 47 seconds before being abruptly terminated and providing the preserved data to investigators. The content of that brief broadcast contained no visible images, as the phone appeared to have been set down or possibly dropped with the camera facing a surface, but the audio captured muffled shouting, the sounds of a physical struggle, and, most damningly, a male voice that family members would later confirm was Jamal's, crying out, "Stop, Olivia, stop!" followed by what audio analysts would identify as the sounds of repeated impacts and gasping. This accidental digital evidence, created by either a mistaken button press or possibly Jamal attempting to summon help in the only way available to him in the moment, would become the cornerstone of the case against Olivia Bennett, providing both a timeline and direct evidence of her presence during the attack. While the digital evidence was being secured, forensic technicians at the apartment made additional discoveries that supported the emerging timeline. Blood spatter analysis suggested the attack had begun near the kitchen island, where a toppled bar stool and broken glass indicated a struggle, continuing into the living room, where the largest concentration of blood was found on and around the white sofa. The trail of blood leading to the balcony told the story of Jamal's desperate attempt to escape, with smear patterns indicating he had been crawling or staggering by that point, severely weakened by his injuries. A partial bloody fingerprint on the balcony door handle matched Olivia's right index finger, placing her at the scene and in contact with blood evidence. The shower drain in the master bathroom contained traces of diluted blood, despite apparent cleaning, and fibers caught in the drain matched the distinctive red fabric of the dress Olivia had been wearing in a social media post earlier that day, suggesting she had washed blood evidence from both herself and the clothing before changing and leaving the apartment. Detective Harris, recognizing the high-profile nature the case would likely assume given Olivia's social media fame, assembled a specialized team including Miami-Dade's top digital forensics expert, Detective Maria Suarez. Suarez immediately began the process of obtaining warrants for all of Olivia's electronic devices and accounts, prioritizing her phone and the cloud storage associated with it. In cases involving influencers, Suarez would later explain to the prosecution team, their digital footprint often provides more reliable evidence than physical evidence because they document so much of their lives and thoughts online, sometimes without realizing the implications. Within hours, emergency preservation orders had been sent to multiple platforms, ensuring that even if Olivia attempted to delete content, the data would remain available to investigators. Miami's position as a hub for social media personalities had given the department substantial experience with cases involving influencers, though usually for lesser crimes like fraud or drug offenses rather than homicide, providing a foundation of expertise that would prove crucial as the investigation unfolded. As the crime scene investigation continued into the evening, Detective Harris turned his attention to locating Olivia Bennett, who had not returned to the apartment and had suddenly gone silent on all social media platforms after years of posting multiple times daily. License plate readers captured her white BMW X5 crossing the MacArthur Causeway toward Miami Beach at 8:12 a.m., approximately 25 minutes before the 911 call was placed suggesting she had left the apartment shortly before the body was discovered. Calls to her phone went straight to voicemail, and her parents in Jacksonville reported they hadn't heard from her that day, expressing shock at the suggestion their daughter might be involved in something so serious. A bolo, be on the lookout, was issued for Bennett and her vehicle across Miami-Dade County, with instructions that officers should approach with caution, but noting she was wanted for questioning, rather than formally named as a suspect at that stage, a tactical decision by Harris to avoid potentially spurring her to flee the state or country. As night fell over Miami, casting long shadows across Biscayne Bay, the investigation had already gathered substantial evidence pointing to Olivia Bennett as the perpetrator of Jamal Phillips's murder. The TikTok live audio, the forensic evidence in the apartment, the witness statement about hearing the distinctive notification sound followed by screaming, and Olivia's sudden disappearance formed a compelling initial case. Miami's palm trees swayed in the warm evening breeze outside the Azura, where news vans had begun to gather as word spread of a homicide involving a social media celebrity, their lights illuminating the building's facade in an unintentional mirror of the spotlight that had followed Olivia throughout her influencer career. Inside the cordoned crime scene, technicians continued their methodical work, documenting a tragedy that had unfolded amid the trappings of internet fame and fabricated perfection, where the foundations of Olivia's carefully constructed online persona had crumbled under the weight of reality, with deadly consequences for the young man who had wanted nothing more than to reclaim his authentic life. The following morning, as Miami awakened to news headlines about a TikTok star's boyfriend found dead, Detective Isaiah Harris sat in a dimly lit room at Miami Police Department headquarters, headphones on, listening intently to the 47-second TikTok live audio for the 12th time. Audio specialists had cleaned up the recording, enhancing voices and filtering background noise, revealing disturbing clarity to what had initially seemed like chaotic sounds of struggle. "You're ruining everything," Olivia's voice could be heard saying, the distinctive cadence and tone matching countless videos she had posted online. "I built all of this. You don't get to just walk away and destroy it." The sounds that followed impacts, gasping, Jamal's increasingly weakening pleas told a horrific story that aligned perfectly with the crime scene evidence, establishing not just Olivia's presence, but her clear intent and motivation. Harris removed his headphones and looked across the table at his partner, nodding grimly as they upgraded Olivia Bennett from person of interest to prime suspect in the murder of Jamal Phillips. Digital forensic specialist Detective Maria Suarez had worked through the night, analyzing the data preserved from TikTok's servers while waiting for the broader warrant returns from other platforms. Her findings proved critical in understanding both the circumstances of the live broadcast and Olivia's actions immediately afterward. The live was initiated at 6:58 p.m. from Olivia Bennett's account using her primary device, an iPhone 13 Pro registered under her name, Suarez reported, showing Harris the detailed connection logs. What's particularly telling is what happened after the live ended at 6:59 p.m. There were 12 separate attempts to delete the archive of that broadcast from TikTok's servers between 7:02 p.m. and 7:35 p.m., all from the same device. The platform automatically saved broadcasts to user accounts, something that many casual users didn't realize, and Olivia's frantic attempts to remove this evidence demonstrated both knowledge of her actions and clear consciousness of guilt. Additionally, location data from the connection logs placed the phone precisely at the Azure apartments during both the broadcast and the deletion attempts, definitively putting Olivia at the scene during the estimated time of the murder. By mid-morning, additional warrant returns had begun flooding in, painting an increasingly damning picture of the events leading up to Jamal's death. Text messages between the couple over the preceding week showed a relationship in crisis, with Jamal expressing his intention to break up and distance himself from the fake content they had been creating. "I can't do this anymore, Liv," he had written 3 days before his death. "I'm tired of pretending we're something we're not for your followers. I want a real life, not a performance." Olivia's responses evolved from pleading, "Please don't do this to me. We can make it work," to explicitly threatening, "You have no idea what you'll be destroying. Everything I've built depends on us. I won't let you ruin this." The final exchange, arranging for Jamal to come collect some of his belongings from the apartment on the evening of the murder, showed Olivia seemingly acquiescing to his decision while suggesting they talk things through one last time, a message that took on sinister implications in light of what followed. As the digital evidence mounted, Olivia Bennett remained missing, her white BMW found abandoned in a shopping center parking lot in Coral Gables, suggesting she might have switched vehicles to evade detection. Detective Harris, concerned about flight risk given Bennett's financial resources from her lucrative brand deals and her familiarity with Miami's international airport and seaports, coordinated with TSA, Customs and Border Protection, and the Coast Guard to flag her identification information. Miami presents unique challenges for fugitive apprehension, Harris explained during the morning briefing. With numerous private airfields, marinas, and proximity to international waters and the Caribbean, we need to move quickly. He assigned teams to canvass locations associated with Bennett, including friends' residences, hotels where she had previously stayed for content creation, and studios where she had filmed sponsored posts, all while monitoring her credit card activity and the social media accounts of her known associates for any indications of contact or assistance. The investigation received an unexpected breakthrough when a beauty salon owner in Miami Beach contacted police after seeing Olivia's photo on the morning news. "She came in yesterday evening around 8:30 p.m., paid cash for our last appointment, and asked for a complete hair transformation, from blonde to dark brown, cut from waist length to a short bob," the stylist reported, providing security camera footage that clearly showed Olivia entering with her distinctive, long blonde hair and leaving with a dramatically different appearance. "She seemed really on edge, checking her phone constantly and asking if we had a back exit she could use because she said fans were getting too aggressive lately. This attempt at disguise, combined with the abandonment of her vehicle and sudden withdrawal of $8,000 from her bank account earlier that day, just below the $10,000 threshold that would trigger automatic reporting, strongly suggested Olivia was actively evading law enforcement, further supporting the case against her, as these were not the actions of someone unaware of their involvement in a crime or planning to cooperate with authorities. As Harris's team continued tracking Olivia's movements, forensic technicians made another significant discovery at the apartment crime scene. Hidden beneath the bathroom sink in a hollowed-out hairspray can, a common influencer hack for hiding valuables that Olivia had ironically demonstrated in a video months earlier, they found a journal containing entries that chronicled her growing desperation as Jamal threatened to leave. "My entire brand is built around us," one entry from 2 weeks before the murder read. "The couple content gets triple the engagement of my solo posts. The makeup line, the fashion deals, everything is tied to being relationship goals. He doesn't understand what's at stake." A more disturbing entry from just days before the murder stated, "If he goes public about us being fake, it's all over. The brands will drop me instantly. 3 years of work destroyed because he suddenly grows a conscience. I won't let that happen. I can't let that happen." This written evidence of premeditation and motive in Olivia's own handwriting further strengthened the case that Jamal's murder wasn't a crime of momentary passion, but the calculated elimination of a threat to her livelihood and identity as an influencer. Late that afternoon, almost 36 hours after the murder, the multi-agency search for Olivia Bennett culminated at Miami International Airport, where facial recognition technology flagged her attempting to board a flight to Bogota, Colombia. Despite her altered appearance and use of minimizing makeup techniques to change her facial features, methods she had previously demonstrated in social media tutorials. She had purchased the ticket under her mother's maiden name using a secondary credit card investigators hadn't yet identified, and was carrying $7,500 in cash along with several pieces of expensive jewelry easily convertible to cash abroad. TSA agents detained her at the security checkpoint, and Detective Harris arrived within minutes to make the formal arrest, reading Bennett her rights as news cameras captured the moment from the terminal's public area. Her expression remained eerily composed, a mask-like control over her features that broke only momentarily when Harris specifically mentioned the TikTok live evidence. A flicker of genuine shock crossing her face before she reassumed her practiced calm demeanor and asked for her attorney. The arrest of Olivia Bennett, once known for spreading positive vibes-only content to her millions of followers, created an immediate media sensation across Miami and beyond, with national news outlets picking up the story of the TikTok star turned fugitive. As Harris escorted her through the airport in handcuffs, the detective couldn't help but notice how she subtly positioned herself for the most flattering angle as news cameras captured her walk to the police vehicle, a chilling indication of how deeply her influencer instincts were ingrained even in this moment of personal catastrophe. Miami, long accustomed to spectacular falls from grace among its celebrity residents, now had a new cautionary tale that perfectly encapsulated the city's contradictions. The sun-drenched paradise of opportunity and reinvention that could quickly reveal a deadlier undertow for those who swam too far from authenticity's shore. In the back of the police cruiser, as palm trees and Art Deco buildings flashed by, Olivia Bennett, now officially charged with the second-degree murder of Jamal Phillips, stared silently out the window at the Miami skyline, the same picturesque backdrop that had featured in hundreds of her carefully staged photos and videos, now framing her journey to county jail and the beginning of her life beyond the carefully filtered lens of social media fame. In the weeks following Olivia Bennett's arrest, the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office assembled a formidable case that centered on the crucial TikTok live audio evidence, but expanded well beyond it to establish a clear timeline, motive, and pattern of escalating behavior. Assistant State Attorney Emma Stewart, assigned as lead prosecutor, had built a reputation for successfully prosecuting complex cases involving digital evidence and worked closely with Detective Harris to ensure every element of the investigation was thoroughly documented and analyzed. "The TikTok live recording gives us the smoking gun," Stewart explained during a strategy session with her team in the States. Attorney's glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Miami. "But to secure a conviction, we need to show the jury the entire narrative, how a young woman became so obsessed with maintaining her social media persona that she viewed murder as an acceptable solution to protect it." The prosecution team meticulously cataloged every piece of evidence, creating a digital timeline that synchronized Olivia's social media activity, location data, text messages, and witness accounts to demonstrate both opportunity and premeditation. The forensic analysis of the TikTok live audio became a centerpiece of the investigation, with audio engineers using advanced technology to enhance the recording and isolate specific sounds. Their report identified 7 distinct impact sounds consistent with stabbing motions, matching the autopsy findings of 7 major stab wounds to Jamal's torso and neck. The audio also captured Olivia's voice saying, "Look what you made me do, and this is your fault," between the 3rd and 4th impacts, statements that directly contradicted any potential self-defense claim and demonstrated her state of mind during the attack. Most damning was the timestamp of the live broadcast, which perfectly aligned with the medical examiner's determined time of death and cell tower data, placing both Olivia's and Jamal's phones at the apartment during those crucial minutes. This digital evidence, Stewart knew, would be particularly compelling to a jury in tech-savvy Miami, where many potential jurors would understand the significance of an accidental live broadcast and the impossibility of fabricating such evidence. The prosecution's case was further strengthened by a comprehensive financial motive that investigators uncovered by analyzing Olivia's brand contracts and sponsorship agreements. Documents obtained via search warrants revealed that Olivia had signed deals worth over $1.2 million in the past year, with 78% of those contracts explicitly requiring couple content, featuring Jamal or specifying minimum monthly posts showcasing their relationship. One cosmetics brand had built an entire campaign around their perfect relationship aesthetic, with a clause requiring immediate notification of any material change to the relationship status and the right to terminate the agreement with no further payment if such a change occurred. The timing proved especially damning. 3 days before the murder, Olivia had signed a new 6-figure deal with a fashion subscription service for a Summer of Love campaign that would have been automatically voided if Jamal followed through on his plan to publicly end their relationship and expose its manufactured nature. Detective Suarez's digital forensics team made another crucial discovery when they recovered deleted search history from Olivia's laptop, revealing queries made in the week before the murder, including how to win back boyfriend threatening to leave, legal consequences of exposing NDA violation, can someone sue for pretending relationship on social media, and most incriminatingly, how long knife puncture takes to kill, and places without U.S. extradition. These searches, conducted in private browsing sessions that Olivia likely believed wouldn't be recoverable, demonstrated both her growing desperation and consideration of lethal options. The laptop also contained a draft of a contract Olivia had prepared but never sent to Jamal, offering him $50,000 to continue appearing in her content for another 6 months while maintaining silence about the true nature of their relationship, suggesting she had first attempted financial inducement before resorting to violence when it became clear he valued his integrity over money. The prosecution built a compelling timeline of the day of the murder, combining security footage, witness statements, and digital breadcrumbs to track both Olivia's and Jamal's movements. Camera footage showed Jamal arriving at the Azura at 5:23 p.m., texting Olivia, "I'm here to get my stuff," as he entered the elevator, his expression solemn but resolved. Olivia, who had been home all afternoon according to building access logs, had spent the hours before his arrival making a series of calls to her management team and brand partners, including one 17-minute call to her agent where, according to the agent's later statement, she had inquired about the financial implications of a temporary break from couple content and seemed unusually concerned about contract termination clauses. Location data from Olivia's phone showed she remained in the apartment until 7:42 p.m. when security cameras captured her leaving the building, corresponding perfectly with the estimated time of the murder and the TikTok live broadcast at 6:58 p.m. Witness testimony from the couple's inner circle provided crucial context for understanding the deteriorating relationship and Olivia's growing obsession with preserving her social media empire at any cost. Jamal's best friend described how Jamal had become increasingly uncomfortable with what he called performing happiness for Olivia's audience, citing a specific incident where Olivia had insisted they reshoot a spontaneous proposal scene 12 times because the lighting wasn't flattering. Another friend, who had worked briefly as Olivia's content assistant, revealed that Olivia maintained a detailed spreadsheet tracking the engagement metrics for different types of posts, with relationship content consistently outperforming her solo material by 300–400%. She would panic if too much time passed without couple content, the former assistant testified in a recorded statement. She would literally say, "My algorithm will tank if we don't post something with Jamal this week," and would get visibly anxious about it, checking her metrics obsessively. This testimony established not just motive, but the psychological state that could drive someone to view a relationship as content first and a human connection second. Perhaps most disturbing to the prosecution team was the evidence they discovered of Olivia's actions immediately following the murder, which demonstrated a calculated attempt to create an alibi and manage her public image, rather than any sign of remorse or trauma. After leaving the apartment at 7:42 p.m., Olivia went to a popular Miami Beach restaurant where she was known as a regular, deliberately choosing a table in clear view of security cameras and making a point of engaging the staff in memorable conversation. She posted a solo selfie at 8:17 p.m. with the caption, "Me time is the best time." Geotagged at the restaurant, establishing her public whereabouts while Jamal lay dead in their apartment. Phone records showed she made no attempt to call emergency services at any point, but instead called her content manager at 9:23 p.m., a call that lasted 38 minutes, and according to the manager's subsequent statement, included discussion of how to pivot her content strategy toward a personal growth journey, suggesting she was already planning her post-relationship rebrand while actively choosing not to seek help for Jamal. As the case against Olivia Bennett continued to build, Emma Stewart worked with her team to address potential defense strategies, particularly anticipating claims of self-defense, or that the killing occurred in the heat of passion rather than with premeditation. The physical evidence strongly contradicted any self-defense claim. Jamal had defensive wounds on his hands and arms, but no offensive injuries, while Olivia had no significant injuries at all. The position of the wounds and blood spatter patterns indicated Jamal had been attacked from behind initially, with no opportunity to threaten Olivia before the assault began. As for a potential heat of passion argument, the prosecutor prepared to counter this with evidence of Olivia's calculated behavior both before and after the crime, the premeditated appointment she had scheduled to change her appearance, the cash withdrawal, the attempted deletion of digital evidence, and the international flight booking, all demonstrating a clear-headed, strategic approach rather than someone overwhelmed by emotion. By the time the case was presented to the grand jury 6 weeks after Jamal's death, the prosecution had assembled a comprehensive narrative supported by forensic evidence, digital data, financial records, and witness testimony that left little doubt about Olivia Bennett's guilt. The grand jury's indictment on charges of second-degree murder reflected their assessment that while the killing may not have been planned days in advance, Olivia had clearly formed the intent to kill Jamal during their argument and had acted deliberately rather than in a momentary loss of control. As Miami's summer heat intensified outside the air-conditioned courthouse, Stewart and her team prepared for what promised to be a high-profile trial that would explore the dark underbelly of social media fame and the deadly consequences when the line between online persona and reality became fatally blurred. The case file, now spanning thousands of pages of evidence and analysis, told the story of a young woman who had become so entangled in her own carefully constructed narrative that she was willing to end a life rather than face its unraveling, a thoroughly modern crime in Miami's endlessly reinventing landscape, where image had always been currency, but rarely had it commanded such a deadly price. Detective Isaiah Harris sat across from Olivia Bennett in Miami-Dade Police Headquarters interrogation room, the stark fluorescent lighting eliminating the shadows and filters that had been her allies throughout her social media career. "We have the TikTok live audio, Olivia," Harris said calmly, placing a tablet on the metal table between them and pressing play, filling the sterile room with the sounds of struggle and Jamal's desperate pleas. Olivia's carefully maintained composure visibly cracked as she heard her own voice threatening Jamal, her eyes widening and hands gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. That's not what it sounds like," she stammered, glancing nervously at her attorney, an expensive criminal defense lawyer known for representing Miami's elite and celebrities. "There's no video. You can't prove that's me or what was happening." Her instinctive response, attempting to cast doubt on digital evidence rather than express shock or grief at hearing the sounds of her boyfriend's final moments, spoke volumes to Harris about her priorities and state of mind. The interrogation had begun 3 hours earlier, following Olivia's processing at county jail after her airport arrest, with Harris methodically building rapport before introducing any evidence. He had allowed her to tell her version of events first, a carefully constructed narrative claiming she had left the apartment around 5 p.m. after a civil conversation with Jamal about their relationship ending, spent the evening alone reflecting at various Miami Beach locations, and only learned about his death the following morning through texts from friends, prompting her to panic and make admittedly poor decisions about changing her appearance and attempting to leave town. "I was scared," she insisted, her voice modulating into the same sympathetic tone she used in apology videos when caught in previous controversies. "I knew how it would look with my following, and I just couldn't face a media circus." Throughout this initial account, Harris noted how she maintained perfect eye contact and spoke without the normal speech patterns of someone under stress, her statements feeling rehearsed rather than recalled, a performance rather than a recollection. When Harris began methodically dismantling her timeline with evidence, Olivia's responses shifted subtly but tellingly. Confronted with building security footage showing she had not left at 5 p.m. but at 7:42 p.m., she claimed she had misspoken about the exact time. Presented with the forensic evidence of blood matching Jamal's found on her designer watch, an item she had apparently forgotten to clean in her haste, she suggested it might have gotten there when she checked if he was breathing before leaving the apartment, inadvertently placing herself at the scene during or after the attack. Her attorney attempted to intervene multiple times, but Olivia repeatedly overrode his cautions to keep talking, displaying the influencer's characteristic belief in her ability to control narratives through sheer force of personality and presentation. She couldn't help herself, Harris would later tell the prosecution team. She's spent years convincing millions of people to believe whatever version of reality she presented, and she genuinely seemed to believe she could do the same with us, despite the physical and digital evidence. The true breaking point came when Harris played the enhanced TikTok live audio, which Olivia had clearly not realized had been preserved and recovered. As the sounds of the struggle filled the interrogation room, color drained from her face, and for the first time, her carefully constructed facade began to crumble completely. "You want to tell me about this, Olivia?" Harris asked quietly when the recording ended, the silence that followed feeling heavier than the sounds that had preceded it. After a long pause during which she appeared to be calculating rather than processing, Olivia launched into a radically different account. Jamal had become aggressive when she refused to sign a contract, giving him a percentage of her earnings from their couple content. She had felt threatened and grabbed the knife in self-defense. The struggle had ensued when he tried to take the weapon from her. "I didn't mean to hurt him," she insisted, tears finally appearing, though Harris noted they never quite fell, hovering at the lower lash line in what seemed like a practiced expression of emotion. "I just wanted him to stop threatening me." Harris methodically exposed the inconsistencies in this new narrative, referencing the autopsy findings that showed stab wounds to Jamal's back, inconsistent with a face-to-face struggle. The evidence of Jamal's text messages showing no financial demands, but rather a desire to exit the relationship and public performance. And most damningly, the journal entries found in the apartment explicitly discussing her fear of financial ruin if he exposed their relationship as performative. "Your own words show you were worried about him destroying your brand deals, not the other way around," Harris pointed out, sliding printouts of her journal entries across the table. "You wrote here, 'I won't let that happen,' just 3 days before he died." As Olivia stared at her own handwriting, her attorney finally succeeded in halting the interview, announcing his client would not be answering any further questions. Before they concluded, however, Olivia asked a question that stunned even the veteran detective. "How many followers has my account lost since this happened?" The interrogation resumed the following morning with a noticeably different Olivia Bennett. Gone was the confident social media star with perfect posture and calculated expressions, replaced by a young woman who appeared to have spent a sleepless night confronting the reality of her situation. Her attorney had clearly advised a change in strategy, as she now sat silently through most of Harris's questions, responding with, "On advice of counsel, I am exercising my right to remain silent when pressed directly." However, when Harris brought up specific pieces of evidence, particularly her internet search history, including queries about knife wounds and extradition, she occasionally broke protocol to offer alternative explanations, claiming the searches were for a true crime script she had been developing for her TikTok account. A defense that fell flat when Harris pointed out that no such content had ever appeared on her platforms and no draft scripts were found among her documents. During a brief break in the interrogation when her attorney stepped out to take a call, Olivia's facade cracked again in an unguarded moment that revealed much about her mindset. "Do you think they'll let me post a statement to my accounts?" she asked Harris suddenly, her voice lower and more authentic than at any previous point. "I need to control the narrative before someone else does." Harris, recognizing an opportunity, engaged her on this topic, asking what such a statement might say. "I'd tell my followers that things aren't always what they seem, that everyone has breaking points," she responded, seemingly forgetting momentarily that she was discussing a homicide investigation rather than a typical influencer controversy. "I'd ask for privacy during this journey and promise to share my truth when the time is right." The calculated nature of these proposed communications, with no mention of Jamal or acknowledgement of his death beyond euphemistic references to this difficult time, provided investigators with critical insight into Olivia's psychological state and her continued prioritization of her online persona over the reality of her actions. On the third day of interrogation, after consulting with the state attorney's office, Harris adopted a new approach focused on the financial implications of the murder. He presented Olivia with spreadsheets detailing her income from brand partnerships tied to relationship content, the contract clauses requiring notification of relationship changes, and projections of the financial losses she would have faced if Jamal had publicly ended their relationship and exposed its manufactured nature. For the first time, Olivia's responses became genuinely emotional rather than performatively so, her voice rising as she defended her business model. "You don't understand what it takes to build something like this," she said, momentarily forgetting her attorney's advice to remain silent. "Do you know how many girls would kill to have the partnerships I secured? Years of work, thousands of hours of content, all of it at risk because he suddenly developed principles." Her use of air quotes around the word principles and the dismissive tone when referencing Jamal's integrity concerns revealed more about her motive than hours of formal questioning had achieved, providing a glimpse of the genuine anger and entitlement that had likely fueled the fatal confrontation. The final phase of the interrogation focused on Olivia's actions after the murder, with Harris methodically walking through her attempts to establish an alibi, change her appearance, and flee the country. When presented with evidence that she had researched one-way flights to Colombia and non-extradition countries multiple times in the days before the murder, her attorney quickly intervened, but not before Olivia had visibly reacted with surprise that this information had been recovered. The detective then revealed that investigators had obtained Olivia's notes application data from her iCloud backup, including a deleted note titled Emergency Plan, created 3 days before the murder, which contained bullet points including cash only, new look, and SA flight options, likely referring to South America. This digital evidence of premeditation directly contradicted her claims of acting in self-defense or in the heat of passion, suggesting she had at least contemplated the possibility of needing to flee before the confrontation with Jamal ever occurred. As the interrogation concluded and Olivia was returned to her cell to await arraignment, Detective Harris met with Prosecutor Emma Stewart to review the findings. She repeatedly displayed more concern about her social media presence than about Jamal's death, Harris noted, sharing his observations of Olivia's behavior throughout the 3 days of questioning. At one point when we took a break, I observed her using the reflection in the two-way mirror to practice facial expressions, literally rehearsing looking remorseful. Stewart nodded, having watched much of the interrogation through that same mirror. What strikes me most is how she kept shifting between narratives when confronted with evidence, always calculating the most advantageous position rather than simply telling the truth, the prosecutor responded. That level of performance and manipulation will be important for the jury to understand. This isn't someone who made a mistake in a heated moment. This is someone who saw a person as an obstacle to be removed from her carefully curated life. As they reviewed their notes in the humid Miami afternoon, the stark fluorescent lights of the interrogation room, now dark, both experienced professionals reflected on how thoroughly the case exemplified the collision between digital fantasy and brutal reality, a thoroughly modern murder motivated by the preservation of an illusion that millions had believed was real. The Miami-Dade County Courthouse stood imposing against the clear blue Florida sky as the trial of Olivia Bennett began on a sweltering Tuesday morning in August, 3 months after the death of Jamal Phillips. A crowd had gathered outside since dawn, a mix of traditional media, social media content creators documenting the spectacle for their own platforms, curious locals, and fans of both Olivia and Jamal, creating a carnival-like atmosphere that belied the gravity of the proceedings about to unfold within. Security was unusually tight, with officers checking identification and conducting bag searches, a measure implemented after several concerning TikTok trends had emerged, including Justice for Olivia videos suggesting various ways supporters might disrupt the trial. Inside Courtroom 4B, Judge Marcus Ramirez addressed these concerns directly before jury selection began, warning that any disruption would result in immediate contempt charges and that no recording devices would be permitted beyond the official court camera. "This is a court of law," he stated firmly to the packed gallery, "not a content creation opportunity." Jury selection proved particularly challenging given Olivia's social media prominence, with the defense and prosecution both struggling to find potential jurors who hadn't been exposed to her content or formed opinions about the case from the extensive media coverage. The process stretched over 3 days as Assistant State Attorney Emma Stewart methodically questioned candidates about their social media usage, asking specifically if they followed influencer accounts or had seen content related to Olivia and Jamal's relationship. "We're not looking for jurors who have never heard of Ms. Bennett," Stewart explained to the judge during a sidebar conference. "That would be nearly impossible, given her following. We're looking for jurors who can set aside what they've seen on TikTok or Instagram and focus solely on the evidence presented in this courtroom." The defense, led by prominent Miami attorney Rafael Dominguez, seemed to pursue an opposite strategy, favoring younger jurors familiar with social media culture who might be more sympathetic to the pressures and business aspects of influencer life, perhaps more likely to understand Olivia's desperate attempt to protect her brand. The final jury comprised 7 women and 5 men ranging in age from 26 to 68, with 4 alternates representing the diverse demographics of Miami-Dade County. Judge Ramirez instructed them specifically on the unique aspects of the case, emphasizing that while they would be shown social media content as evidence, they should consider only its relevance to the case rather than any personal feelings about influencer culture or lifestyles. "Your task is not to judge Ms. Bennett's career choices or content," he explained carefully. "Your task is to determine whether the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that she committed the crime of second-degree murder as charged." With these instructions delivered, the bailiff called the court to order, and Emma Stewart approached the podium to deliver her opening statement, her tailored navy suit and minimal jewelry projecting seriousness and respect for the proceedings in stark contrast to the fashion-forward, camera-ready appearance of the defendant. "This case," Stewart began, her voice clear and measured as she made eye contact with each juror in turn, "is about what happens when the line between performance and reality blurs to the point where a young woman was willing to end a life, rather than face the collapse of her carefully constructed online persona." She methodically outlined the state's case, explaining how Olivia Bennett had built a lucrative career around her seemingly perfect relationship with Jamal Phillips, securing brand deals worth over $1 million annually based largely on content featuring the two of them. When Jamal Phillips decided he no longer wanted to participate in this performance, when he chose authenticity over pretense and informed Ms. Bennett of his intention to end their relationship and be honest about its manufactured nature, he unknowingly signed his own death warrant. Stewart then played a brief, court-appropriate clip of one of Olivia's most popular videos, showing the couple in what appeared to be a spontaneous moment of affection on Miami Beach, garnering over 12 million views and numerous sponsored partnerships, juxtaposed with text messages from that same day showing Olivia instructing Jamal to try it again with more natural-looking surprise after multiple takes. The prosecutor then turned to the central piece of evidence, preparing the jury for what they would hear later in the trial. Ladies and gentlemen, the most compelling evidence in this case came from the defendant herself through a tragic twist of technological fate, Stewart explained, her tone solemn. On the evening of March 15th, as Olivia Bennett was in the process of stabbing Jamal Phillips multiple times, her phone activated the TikTok live feature, either accidentally or perhaps as Jamal desperately reached for it to summon help. For 47 seconds, that broadcast captured the sounds of the struggle, Jamal's pleas for his life, and most damningly, Ms. Bennett's own voice making statements that reveal both her actions and her motive. She promised the jury they would hear expert testimony about the authenticity of this recording, its chain of custody from TikTok's servers, and forensic analysis confirming the voices and the nature of the sounds captured. This is not a case built on circumstantial evidence or competing narratives, Stewart emphasized. This is a case where technology captured the actual moments of a young man's death and the voice of his killer. Stewart then methodically walked the jury through the timeline of events using a large digital display to show security footage, text messages, and social media posts that established Olivia's movements and state of mind before, during, and after the murder. She highlighted the evidence of premeditation, the internet searches about knife wounds and countries without extradition treaties, the emergency plan note created days before the murder, and the journal entries expressing determination not to let Jamal destroy what she had built. The evidence will show that Ms. Bennett made a calculation, Stewart concluded, her voice firm, as she gestured toward the defendant. She weighed the value of Jamal Phillips' life against the value of her social media empire and decided that her online persona was worth more than his existence. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the very definition of second-degree murder under Florida law, a killing carried out with a depraved mind, regardless of human life. And that is exactly what the state will prove beyond any reasonable doubt. Defense attorney Rafael Dominguez rose next, his approach creating an immediate contrast with the prosecution. Where Stewart had been measured and methodical, Dominguez was passionate and emphatic, his Miami-bred Spanish accent becoming more pronounced as his voice rose with emotion. What Assistant State Attorney Stewart just presented to you was a performance worthy of TikTok itself, a carefully edited narrative that leaves out crucial context and humanity, he began, moving from behind the defense table to stand closer to the jury box. Yes, Olivia Bennett is an influencer. Yes, she made money from creating content. And yes, her relationship with Jamal Phillips was part of that content. But the prosecution's characterization of this as some kind of calculated business arrangement completely misrepresents the complex reality of modern relationships in the digital age. Dominguez argued that the jury needed to understand the unique pressures faced by young people who live their lives online, suggesting that the boundaries between performance and authenticity become inevitably blurred in ways that older generations might not comprehend. Dominguez then turned to the events of March 15th, offering an alternative interpretation of the evidence that would be presented. What happened that night was a tragedy, but it was not murder, he insisted. It was the culmination of weeks of emotional turmoil, threats, and fear. He claimed that Jamal had become increasingly controlling and resentful of Olivia's success, allegedly demanding financial compensation for his role in her content and threatening to destroy her career out of spite if she didn't comply. The prosecution played you a clip of a happy couple on the beach, but didn't show you the darker reality that existed when the cameras were off, Dominguez continued, though he offered no specific evidence to support these characterizations that ran counter to all witness statements collected during the investigation. He suggested that the TikTok live audio, while disturbing, captured only a fragment of a longer confrontation in which Olivia had acted to defend herself from Jamal's alleged aggression, claiming that expert analysis would show evidence of a struggle initiated by the victim rather than the defendant. The defense's opening concluded with an appeal to consider the case in the context of modern realities rather than traditional expectations. This is not a conventional relationship or a conventional case, Dominguez argued, gesturing expansively. This is about two young people navigating fame, pressure, and identity in the digital age, where the lines between public and private, real and performed, become hopelessly entangled. Olivia Bennet is not a calculating killer. She is an 18-year-old who found herself in an impossible situation, fighting to protect herself both physically and in terms of the identity she had built. He asked the jury to keep an open mind and to consider whether the prosecution could truly prove its case beyond reasonable doubt, particularly regarding Olivia's mental state and intent at the moment of Jamal's death. When you have heard all the evidence, he concluded, looking directly at each juror, you will find that this tragic situation falls far short of murder and that Olivia Bennet acted out of fear and self-preservation, not malice or depraved indifference to human life. Judge Ramirez called a brief recess following opening statements, during which the courtroom buzzed with reactions to the starkly different narratives presented by the two sides. As jurors filed out, many glanced at Olivia, who sat at the defense table in a conservative navy dress. Her once signature blonde hair now returned to its natural color and styled simply, a stark contrast to her glamorous social media image. Throughout the prosecution's opening, she had maintained a solemn, attentive expression, occasionally taking notes or leaning to whisper to her attorney, presenting the image of a serious young woman wrongly accused rather than the carefree, effervescent personality her followers knew. Miami journalist Camila Rodriguez, covering the trial for a national news outlet, noted in her live blog that Olivia's courtroom demeanor appeared meticulously crafted, a performance designed to counter the prosecution's portrayal of her as shallow and image-obsessed. As the bailiff called the court back to order for the prosecution's first witness, the stage was set for a trial that would not only determine Olivia Bennet's fate, but also potentially offer a searing examination of influencer culture and the sometimes deadly consequences when digital fame collides with human reality in the sun-drenched, image-conscious environment of Miami, where appearance and substance had always maintained a complex, sometimes contradictory, relationship. Dr. Eleanor Chen, the Miami-Dade County medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Jamal Phillips, took the stand on the trial's third day, her clinical precision providing stark contrast to the emotional testimony of Jamal's family members that had preceded her. The deceased sustained 7 major stab wounds, Dr. Chen testified, gesturing to anatomical diagrams displayed on screens visible to the jury. The fatal wound penetrated between the 3rd and 4th ribs on the left side of the chest, piercing the heart and causing rapid blood loss that would have resulted in death within minutes. Using laser pointers and detailed photographs, she methodically walked the jury through each injury, noting that 3 wounds were to the back, strongly suggesting Jamal had been attacked from behind or while turning away, directly contradicting the defense's claim of a face-to-face confrontation. Based on blood spatter patterns and wound trajectories, she concluded, referencing her 30 years of forensic experience. These injuries are consistent with an assailant who continued to stab the victim as he attempted to flee, with the final fatal wound delivered as he faced away from his attacker, likely already weakened from the initial injuries. Under cross-examination, defense attorney Dominguez attempted to introduce doubt about the sequence and nature of the wounds. Is it possible, Dr. Chen, that these injuries could have been sustained during a chaotic struggle where both parties were moving and grappling for the weapon? He asked, suggesting a scenario more aligned with self-defense. Chen's response was measured but definitive, her credentials lending significant weight to her conclusions. While struggles can produce unpredictable injury patterns, the distribution, depth, and angle of these wounds are not consistent with defensive actions or a mutual struggle, she stated firmly. The wounds to the back in particular would require the assailant to be behind a victim who was either unaware of the attack or attempting to escape it. When pressed further about whether Olivia, at 5'4" and 115 pounds, could have overpowered Jamal at 5'11" and 175 pounds, Chen explained that the element of surprise and the use of a weapon would have negated any physical advantage, particularly given evidence that the initial attack came from behind. Once the first deep wounds were inflicted, she testified, the victim would have been rapidly weakened by blood loss and shock, regardless of his size relative to the assailant. The prosecution's most anticipated witness, audio forensics expert Dr. Jonathan Reed, took the stand on Day 4 to analyze the crucial TikTok live recording. With 25 years of experience, including work with the FBI and multiple academic publications on digital audio authentication, Dr. Reed represented a formidable challenge to any defense attempts to discredit the recording. Before playing the enhanced audio for the jury, he explained the rigorous process used to verify its authenticity and chain of custody from TikTok's servers. This recording contains several forms of digital metadata and watermarks that conclusively establish it was created at the time and location indicated, with no evidence of alteration or manipulation, Reed testified, displaying technical data incomprehensible to laypeople but establishing the scientific foundation for his conclusions. The courtroom fell silent as the enhanced audio played. The sounds of struggle and Jamal's increasingly desperate pleas causing several jurors to visibly wince, while others took notes with grim expressions. After allowing the jury to absorb the raw emotional impact of the recording, Dr. Reed provided a detailed technical analysis, breaking down the audio into segments and identifying specific sounds. At timestamp ER012, we hear the distinctive sound of a knife or similar implement penetrating tissue, followed by a male voice crying out in pain, he explained clinically, using waveform displays to illustrate his points. At timestamp 0018, we hear a female voice saying, "You're ruining everything," followed by another impact sound. At 0023, the same female voice says, "I built all of this. You don't get to just walk away and destroy it," followed by 3 more impact sounds in rapid succession. He confirmed that voice recognition analysis matched the female voice to multiple verified recordings of Olivia Bennett from her social media accounts, with a confidence level of 99.2%, and the male voice to samples of Jamal Phillips from his music production work, with similar certainty. Most damningly, he identified background sounds consistent with the specific layout and acoustics of the apartment where the murder occurred, including the distinctive sound of waves against the building's foundation that could be heard through the open balcony door, placing the recording unequivocally at the crime scene. Under aggressive cross-examination, Dr. Reed remained unflappable as defense attorney Dominguez attempted to introduce doubt about the recording's interpretation. "Isn't it possible, Dr. Reed, that what you're identifying as impact sounds could be other objects being struck or falling during a struggle?" Dominguez pressed. Reed acknowledged that audio interpretation always involved some degree of professional judgment, but explained that the specific acoustic signature of these sounds, when analyzed using spectral frequency mapping, matched known samples of knife impacts in human tissue from his forensic database. The probability that these are random household objects being struck is extremely low based on mathematical analysis of the sound patterns, he stated confidently. When Dominguez suggested that Olivia's statements could have been taken out of context from a longer argument, Reed pointed out that the continuous nature of the background noise throughout the recording indicated no breaks or edits, meaning her statements were made exactly as presented, in the sequence heard by the jury. The prosecution's case gained further strength through the testimony of Kayla Washington, Jamal's close friend and fellow music student, who provided crucial context about the relationship's reality versus its online portrayal. Jamal was increasingly uncomfortable with the fake relationship content, she testified, describing conversations in the weeks leading up to his death. He told me he felt like he was losing himself, that it had started as a fun opportunity, but had become this exhausting performance where nothing was real. She recounted specific instances where Olivia had pressured Jamal to participate in elaborate staged scenarios for content, including a surprise weekend getaway that had actually been meticulously planned weeks in advance with a hotel partnership requiring multiple takes and specific product placements that had left Jamal feeling like a prop, not a person. Most significantly, Washington testified that 2 days before his death, Jamal had shown her a draft statement he was planning to share on his own social media accounts, explaining his decision to end the relationship and acknowledging that much of their online content had been manufactured rather than authentic, the very action that would have potentially triggered the termination clauses in Olivia's brand contracts. Michael Zhang, TikTok's director of data security, who had traveled from California to testify, provided testimony that strengthened the technical foundation of the prosecution's case. He explained to the jury the platform's automatic archiving of live broadcasts, a feature many users didn't fully understand, but which had preserved crucial evidence in this case. Even when a user terminates a live broadcast, our systems maintain a temporary archive for at least 24 hours, Zhang explained. This is primarily for content moderation purposes, but it means the broadcast from Ms. Bennett's account was preserved even though she attempted to delete it multiple times. He confirmed that TikTok's internal logs showed 12 separate deletion attempts within the hour following the broadcast, all from the same device that had initiated the live stream, demonstrating Olivia's awareness of the recording and desperate attempts to remove it. Zhang also addressed how the live feature could have been activated, noting that while it required touching a specific icon on the app interface, this could happen accidentally if the phone was set down with the screen unlocked or if someone was frantically trying to use the device during a struggle. The most visibly impactful testimony came from Jamal's mother, Denise Phillips, who took the stand wearing a pendant containing a small photograph of her son. Speaking in a quiet voice that occasionally broke with emotion, she described the talented, ambitious young man behind the carefully styled image seen in Olivia's content. Jamal wasn't just someone's boyfriend or social media accessory, she stated firmly, looking directly at the jury. He was a gifted musician who was working so hard to build something real in the industry, to create opportunities for other young artists. She shared his childhood passion for music, how he had saved for years to buy his first professional equipment, and his excitement about the University of Miami program. When prosecutor Stewart asked about when she first learned of Jamal's relationship with Olivia, Mrs. Phillips recalled initial concerns about the public nature of their romance. He assured me it was helping his career too, giving him connections in the industry, she testified. But in our last phone call, just a week before he died, he told me he was planning to end it because it had become exhausting pretending to be someone he wasn't. This testimony directly connected to the prosecution's narrative about Jamal's growing discomfort with the manufactured relationship and his intention to exit it authentically, providing the motive for Olivia's desperate action. In a strategic move that surprised some observers, the defense called social media marketing expert Veronica Suarez to testify about the financial and psychological pressures faced by influencers. The digital creator economy is fundamentally different from traditional employment, Suarez explained to the jury, noting her experience working with hundreds of influencers through her Miami-based consultancy. For someone like Ms. Bennett, her entire financial stability, identity, and future career prospects were directly tied to maintaining specific engagement metrics and fulfilling brand contracts. She described the phenomenon of platform dependence, where young creators develop their entire sense of self-worth around online validation, creating psychological conditions where threats to their online persona are processed by the brain similarly to physical threats. While stopping short of justifying violence, Suarez suggested that the jury should consider these unique pressures when evaluating Olivia's mental state during the confrontation with Jamal, effectively attempting to build a foundation for a diminished capacity or extreme emotional distress argument. The prosecution effectively countered this testimony during cross-examination, with Emma Stewart methodically dismantling the implicit suggestion that career pressures could somehow mitigate responsibility for a killing. Ms. Suarez, are you aware of any other cases where influencers have responded to relationship breakups or content disputes by committing homicide? Stewart asked pointedly. Suarez acknowledged she was not. And of the hundreds of influencers you've worked with who have experienced account demonetization, brand deal cancellations, or public controversies, how many responded with violence rather than platform pivots or career adjustments? Stewart continued, establishing that while the pressures might be real, the violent response was extraordinary and unjustifiable. By the end of the exchange, Suarez's testimony had been effectively neutralized, with Stewart concluding, "So what you're describing is essentially an occupational hazard that millions of content creators navigate daily without resorting to violence, correct?" To which Suarez could only respond affirmatively. As the evidence phase of the trial neared conclusion, perhaps the most damaging testimony came from Brandon Miller, Olivia's former content manager who had worked closely with her for 18 months, including the period leading up to the murder. Initially hesitant on the stand, Miller described how Olivia's obsession with metrics and engagement had intensified as her following grew, with increasingly frantic reactions to any content that underperformed. "She once called me at 3 a.m. crying because a couple post got 20% fewer likes than her previous one. Convinced her career was over," he testified. The relationship content was everything to her business model. It consistently outperformed her solo posts by huge margins and was what all the big brands wanted. Miller then reluctantly recounted a conversation from approximately 2 weeks before the murder, when Olivia had learned that Jamal was considering ending their relationship and going public about its manufactured nature. She said, and I quote, "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen." "He doesn't understand what he'd be destroying," Miller testified, looking down at his hands rather than at his former client. "At the time, I thought she meant financially or legally, like with an NDA. I never imagined—" His voice trailed off, the implication clear to everyone in the courtroom. As the 8th day of testimony concluded with Miller's cross-examination, both the prosecution and defense teams prepared for final arguments. The jury had heard from 23 witnesses, reviewed hundreds of pieces of evidence, including text messages, social media posts, financial records, and most critically, the TikTok Live audio that captured the fatal confrontation. Throughout the trial, Olivia Bennett had maintained her composure, appearing attentive and occasionally emotional at strategic moments, though observers noted she seemed most visibly affected not during testimony about Jamal's death, but during discussions of her lost brand deals and follower counts. Outside the Miami-Dade County Courthouse, the media encampment had grown rather than diminished, with commentators from traditional news outlets alongside social media creators offering real-time analysis and speculation about the outcome. As Miami's relentless August sun beat down on the courthouse steps, the case that had exposed the darkest potential consequences of digital fame in the social media age moved toward its conclusion, with 12 jurors soon to decide whether Olivia Bennett's desperate attempt to preserve her carefully curated online persona justified the most serious punishment under Florida law. After 4 days of deliberation, longer than many legal analysts had anticipated, the jury in the Olivia Bennett murder trial filed back into courtroom 4B at 2:17 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, their expressions unreadable as they avoided eye contact with both the defendant and the crowded gallery. Judge Marcus Ramirez addressed the packed courtroom, admonishing that there would be absolutely no outbursts or demonstrations, regardless of the verdict, a warning necessitated by the palpable tension that had built during the lengthy deliberations and the passionate factions that had formed both inside and outside the Miami-Dade County Courthouse. Olivia sat unnaturally still at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while across the aisle, Jamal's family huddled together in the front row, his mother clutching a small photo of her son, as she had throughout the trial. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Ramirez asked, his voice cutting through the silence that had fallen over the courtroom, with even the usually restless press photographers momentarily stilling their cameras in anticipation of what was to come. "We have, Your Honor," the jury foreperson replied, a middle-aged woman who worked as a high school counselor and had been selected by her fellow jurors to speak for the group. The bailiff collected the verdict form and delivered it to Judge Ramirez, who reviewed it silently before returning it, his expression giving no indication of its contents. "The defendant will please rise," he instructed, and Olivia stood alongside her attorneys, a slight tremor visible in her hands despite her otherwise composed demeanor. The foreperson unfolded the paper and read in a clear, steady voice, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Olivia Bennett, guilty of murder in the second degree as charged in the indictment." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by muffled sobs from both Olivia's parents and Jamal's family, though for entirely different reasons. Olivia herself seemed to freeze in place, her expression shifting from disbelief to shock. As the reality of the verdict registered, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking as she swayed slightly before her attorney grasped her elbow to steady her. Judge Ramirez thanked the jury for their service and set a sentencing date for 2 weeks later, remanding Olivia to custody while denying a defense request for continued bail-pending sentencing. As deputies approached to escort her from the courtroom, Olivia appeared to finally process what was happening, turning to look at her parents in the gallery with an expression of genuine panic that stood in stark contrast to her controlled demeanor throughout the trial. Outside the courthouse, the verdict triggered immediate and polarized reactions among the hundreds of spectators who had gathered in anticipation of the decision, with supporters of Jamal's family erupting in cheers while a vocal contingent of Olivia's fans expressed outrage, some crying openly as they live-streamed their reactions. Miami police had prepared for potential unrest, deploying additional officers around the courthouse perimeter where the two factions were separated by barricades, their confrontation playing out not just in person but across social media platforms where hashtags related to the verdict began trending within minutes. The digital reaction to the verdict revealed a troubling division along generational and ideological lines, reflecting broader societal tensions about influencer culture and accountability. Older commentators and traditional media largely framed the verdict as appropriate justice for a calculated killing, while a significant subset of younger social media users expressed sympathy for Olivia, characterizing her as a victim of cancel culture and industry pressures. "She was just protecting her career and livelihood," read one viral TikTok with over 2 million views within hours of the verdict. "Any creator would understand the panic of losing everything you've built." This narrative gained particular traction among aspiring influencers and those embedded in creator economies, some of whom shared unsettling videos defending Olivia's actions as an understandable, if extreme, response to Jamal's threat to expose their manufactured relationship, reflecting a value system where online success was positioned as potentially worth more than human life. More nuanced analysis came from digital ethics experts and mental health professionals who saw the case as a watershed moment, revealing the dangerous psychological consequences of platform dependence and digital validation. What we're witnessing is the extreme end of a spectrum that affects millions of young people, explained Dr. Maya Patel, a Miami-based psychologist specializing in social media's impact on identity formation, during a news panel following the verdict. When your entire sense of self and financial security becomes wrapped up in maintaining a particular online narrative, the boundaries between digital performance and reality blur to the point where threats to that narrative can trigger fight-or-flight responses typically reserved for physical danger. This perspective wasn't offered to excuse Olivia's actions, but to contextualize them within a broader conversation about the potentially harmful psychological effects of influencer lifestyles and the pressure to maintain perfectionist facades for public consumption. For Jamal's family, the verdict represented validation, but not closure, as his mother, Denise Phillips, explained in a brief, dignified statement delivered on the courthouse steps. Today, the truth about what happened to my son has been recognized, but no verdict can bring Jamal back or give him the chance to fulfill his dreams, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. Jamal believed in authenticity and integrity, values that cost him his life in a world too often focused on appearances and metrics rather than human connection and genuine creativity. She announced the family's intention to establish the Jamal Phillips Foundation for Authentic Voices, dedicated to supporting young musicians from underrepresented backgrounds and advocating for greater transparency in social media, ensuring that some positive legacy would emerge from their tragic loss. As she spoke, several of Jamal's friends and classmates from the University of Miami's music program stood behind her wearing T-shirts bearing his image and the phrase "Create Authentically," which had become something of a rallying cry among those who saw his death as symptomatic of broader issues within influencer culture. Olivia's legal team immediately announced their intention to appeal the verdict, citing what they claimed were procedural errors, and the judge's decisions to allow certain evidence, particularly the TikTok live audio, which they had unsuccessfully attempted to have excluded on technical grounds. Defense attorney Rafael Dominguez addressed reporters with Olivia's parents flanking him, both looking shell-shocked by the outcome. "We respect the jury's process, but strongly disagree with their conclusion," Dominguez stated. This case involved unique circumstances that the legal system is still adapting to understand, particularly regarding the pressures and realities of digital creator economies. He suggested that the prosecution had unfairly portrayed Olivia as calculating and cold, rather than as a young woman in psychological distress, though this characterization contradicted substantial evidence presented during the trial about her methodical actions before and after the killing. 2 weeks later, on a humid September morning, Olivia Bennett returned to Judge Ramirez's courtroom for sentencing, the intervening period having done nothing to diminish public interest in the case. She appeared noticeably thinner, her designer courtroom attire replaced by standard-issue jail clothing, the physical manifestation of her fall from social media royalty to convicted murderer starkly evident in her diminished presence. Before the judge announced her sentence, Olivia was given the opportunity to address the court, rising slowly to deliver a statement that many observers noted seemed carefully crafted to serve as potential content for future reputation rehabilitation, rather than expressing genuine remorse. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she began, her voice initially steady, but growing more emotional in what seemed like calculated crescendos. "Social media became my whole world, and I lost perspective on what was really important. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused Jamal's family and my own." Notably absent from her statement was any direct acknowledgement of her actions or responsibility for Jamal's death, with her apology framed around causing pain rather than taking a life, a distinction not lost on either the judge or the Phillips family. Judge Ramirez then delivered his sentencing decision, prefacing it with remarks that addressed not just the specific case, but its broader implications. Ms. Bennett, you've been convicted of taking a young man's life, not in a moment of passion or fear, but because he threatened the carefully constructed image you had created online, he stated, his tone measured but stern. The evidence presented at trial showed not just the crime itself, but a pattern of behavior that prioritized your social media success over basic human decency and ultimately over Jamal Phillips's right to live an authentic life. He noted the particularly calculated nature of her actions before and after the murder, her attempts to establish an alibi, alter her appearance, and flee the country, all indicating consciousness of guilt rather than the remorse she now claimed to feel. This court sentences you to 10 years in the Florida State Penitentiary, followed by 10 years of supervised probation, he concluded. Additionally, you are prohibited from monetizing this case in any form during your incarceration or probation, including through books, interviews, social media content, or third-party accounts managed on your behalf. The sentence, shorter than the maximum possible for second-degree murder, but substantial for a first-time offender of Olivia's age and background, provoked mixed reactions both in the courtroom and across the digital landscape where the case had played out in parallel to the legal proceedings. Jamal's family accepted the decision with quiet dignity, while Olivia's supporters online immediately began campaigns claiming the punishment was excessive and influenced by public opinion rather than judicial standards. Legal analysts generally viewed the sentence as appropriate, given the specific circumstances, though some noted that Judge Ramirez's unusual addition of prohibitions against monetization reflected the unique nature of a case involving an influencer defendant and anticipated attempts to convert notoriety into continued relevance and eventual profit, a pattern seen in other high-profile criminal cases involving public figures. As Olivia was led from the courtroom to begin serving her sentence, the spectacle that had consumed Miami for months began its gradual transition from breaking news to cautionary tale. In the humid afternoon outside the courthouse, demonstrators from both sides gradually dispersed, though the digital discussion continued unabated, across platforms where the case had found its most engaged audience. Miami, a city long accustomed to dramatic narratives played out against its picturesque backdrop, absorbed this thoroughly modern tragedy into its complex identity, another story of ambition, image, and destruction that reflected both timeless human failings and distinctly contemporary pressures. For the influencers who had traveled to witness the proceedings, many broadcasting their reactions in real time to their own. Followers, the sobering reality of Olivia's fall offered a moment of reflection on the potentially dangerous psychology of platform dependency, though whether that reflection would translate to meaningful change remained to be seen as they returned to the familiar comfort of filters, engagement metrics, and the endless pursuit of validation that had driven Olivia Bennett to destroy both Jamal Phillips' life and her own. 6 months after Olivia Bennett began serving her sentence at Lowell Correctional Institution, a medium-security women's prison in Central Florida, the ripples from what the media had dubbed the TikTok murder continued to spread through both Miami's local community and the broader digital landscape. Jamal Phillips' family had channeled their grief into establishing the foundation bearing his name, which had already provided scholarships to 5 promising music production students from underrepresented backgrounds at the University of Miami's Frost School of Music, where a recording studio had been renamed in Jamal's honor. "We want to create the opportunities Jamal never got to realize," his mother Denise explained during the emotional dedication ceremony, where several of Jamal's original compositions were performed by his former classmates. This foundation isn't just about music. It's about encouraging young people to pursue authentic creativity, rather than chasing metrics and validation. The foundation had quickly gained support from several established musicians and producers, many of whom had been troubled by the case's implications about the pressure to maintain manufactured personas for public consumption, recognizing their own industry's complicity in elevating image over substance. The University of Miami had responded to the tragedy by establishing a required course for all communications and art students called Digital Ethics and Authentic Expression, addressing the psychological impacts of platform dependency and the increasingly blurred boundaries between performed and genuine identity in the social media age. Professor Carmen Rodriguez, who developed the curriculum, described it as a direct response to the factors that contributed to Jamal's death, incorporating case studies that examined the pressures facing content creators and strategies for maintaining psychological well-being amid the demands of digital audiences. We're seeing students really grapple with these issues in personal ways, Rodriguez noted during an interview in her sunlit office overlooking the Miami campus. Many of them arrived here already maintaining substantial online presences and pursuing influencer paths without fully understanding the potential psychological costs or ethical complexities. The course had gained national attention, with several other universities requesting permission to adopt similar programs, recognizing that Jamal and Olivia's tragedy represented systemic issues rather than an isolated incident. Miami's influencer community, one of the largest in the nation due to the city's photogenic locations, vibrant culture, and favorable lighting, had experienced its own reckoning in the wake of the case, with many creators publicly questioning practices they had previously taken for granted. The trend of relationship content had notably declined, with couples who continued to feature their relationships online increasingly including disclaimers about the staged nature of certain posts, or deliberately showing less curated moments alongside the perfectly composed ones. A group of Miami-based content creators had formed the Authentic Influence Collective, committed to transparency about sponsorships, staging, and the realities behind their content. What happened with Olivia and Jamal forced a lot of us to look in the mirror, explained founding member Diego Hernandez, whose travel and lifestyle content reached millions. We realized we were contributing to impossible standards and potentially harmful psychological patterns, not just for ourselves, but for everyone consuming our content. Major brands that had previously contracted with Olivia Bennett had responded to the case by revising their influencer agreements, with several major companies implementing authenticity clauses that prohibited manufactured relationships or deceptive personal narratives as part of sponsored content. TikTok itself had introduced new creator guidelines specifically addressing relationship content, requiring clear disclosure when romantic relationships featured in monetized posts were staged or exaggerated for entertainment purposes. Platform responsibility has to extend beyond content moderation to the incentive structures we create, explained TikTok's newly appointed Director of Creator Ethics, Sophia Wang, during a digital media conference in Miami 6 months after the verdict. When we reward certain types of content with algorithmic promotion and monetization opportunities, we're shaping behavior in ways that can have serious psychological consequences, as this case tragically demonstrated. Psychological researchers had seized on the case as a compelling example of digital identity disorder, a proposed classification for the psychological condition where individuals become so invested in their online personas that threats to those constructed identities trigger extreme emotional and sometimes physical responses. Dr. Alejandro Vega, a psychiatrist at the University of Miami's Miller School of Medicine, had published a paper analyzing Olivia Bennett's case alongside similar, though less extreme examples, identifying common risk factors and potential intervention points. What we're seeing is the emergence of a new type of psychological risk specific to the digital age, Dr. Vega explained from his office, where he was conducting a longitudinal study of content creators' mental health patterns. When your income, social status, and sense of self-worth become inextricably linked to maintaining a particular online narrative, the boundaries between performance and reality dissolve in potentially dangerous ways. Olivia Bennet herself remained a contradictory figure in the public imagination, simultaneously serving as cautionary tale and continuing object of fascination. Despite Judge Ramirez's prohibition on monetizing the case, numerous unauthorized accounts had emerged claiming inside information about her life in prison, some accumulating millions of followers eager for updates on the fallen influencer. Genuine information was sparse, though her parents occasionally spoke to selected media outlets, portraying their daughter as a victim of mental health issues and industry pressures, rather than as someone responsible for a calculated act of violence. A prison spokesperson had confirmed that Bennet received an unusually high volume of mail from supporters, many of whom continued to view her actions through the lens of protecting her career, rather than as the criminal act for which she had been convicted, reflecting a troubling value system that placed digital success above human life. For the criminal justice professionals who had worked the case, the aftermath brought mixed emotions as they observed how different communities processed the events and their implications. Detective Isaiah Harris, who had led the investigation, had become a reluctant expert on digital evidence in homicide cases, frequently consulted by other departments facing similar challenges with social media-adjacent crimes. What struck me most about this case wasn't just the crime itself, but how clearly it exposed a value system that prioritized online success over basic humanity, Harris reflected during a law enforcement conference where he presented on the investigation. Bennett's first question after being arrested wasn't about potential sentences or legal options. It was about how many followers she had lost. That mindset isn't unique to her. It's just that most people with those priorities don't end up committing homicide when their online narratives are threatened. Prosecutor Emma Stewart had similarly found her career shaped by the high-profile case, becoming a frequent speaker on the intersection of social media and criminal behavior. The Bennet trial revealed something important about our evolving understanding of motive in the digital age, she explained during a lecture at the University of Miami Law School, where students packed the auditorium to hear her insights. Traditionally, we categorize motives in terms of passion, financial gain, revenge, or concealment of other crimes. But Bennett's case represented something different: murder to preserve a digital identity and the financial ecosystem built around it. The law is still catching up to these new psychological realities. Stewart had subsequently been appointed to head a specialized unit focusing on technology-facilitated crimes, recognizing that the Bennet case represented not an anomaly, but the emergence of new categories of criminal motivation specific to the digital era. The city of Miami itself had incorporated the case into its complex identity, another chapter in its history of spectacular rises and falls, played out against a backdrop of beauty and excess. Tour guides now sometimes included the Azura apartment building on their routes, pointing out the 15th floor balcony where Jamal had died, while trying to explain to often perplexed older tourists the concept of influencer culture and its potentially dark undercurrents. Local artists had created works responding to the case, including a powerful mural in Wynwood depicting Jamal at his mixing board alongside the words "Choose Authenticity" that had become something of a pilgrimage site for both his supporters and those troubled by the case's implications about digital identity and value systems. Miami's reputation as an influencer haven had been temporarily shadowed by the tragedy, though the city's eternal sunshine and photogenic locations ensured that new content creators quickly replaced those who had been sobered by the case's implications, the cycle of performance and validation continuing uninterrupted against the city's palm-lined streets and turquoise waters. Perhaps the most profound impact of the case emerged not in Miami, but across bedroom screens nationwide, where young consumers of social media began approaching content with more skeptical and nuanced perspectives. High schools reported students initiating conversations about authenticity in digital spaces, questioning the performed happiness and manufactured moments that had previously been accepted without criticism. A survey conducted 1 year after the verdict found that 62% of teenagers reported being more aware of potential staging in influencer content as a direct result of learning about the case, with many describing specific changes in their consumption habits, including reduced time on platforms and greater emphasis on content creators who demonstrated transparency about the constructed nature of their posts. This shifting awareness represented a potential inflection point in digital media consumption, suggesting that Jamal's death, while unable to reverse the broader trends toward performance and metrics-driven content, had at least created space for critical engagement with these phenomena among their primary audience. 10 years after the murder, when Olivia Bennett would complete her prison sentence and re-enter a digital landscape that had evolved in her absence, questions already swirled about what her return might look like and whether the lessons of the case would endure beyond its immediate shock value. Some experts predicted she would attempt to reframe her story as one of redemption and learning, potentially finding an audience receptive to narratives of transformation regardless of the severity of the original offense. Others suggested that the prohibition against monetizing the case, if enforced throughout her probation period, might create the rare scenario where genuine reflection, rather than performance, became necessary for someone who had built their identity around external validation. The digital ethics courses that had emerged in the wake of the case now incorporated these questions about redemption and re-entry, asking students to consider the complex moral calculations involved in consuming content from someone convicted of taking a life to preserve their online persona. As Miami's endless summer continued, with new generations of influencers posing against the same sunsets and architectural backdrops that had featured in Olivia Bennett's content, Jamal Phillips's legacy endured through the creative work of scholarship recipients and the ongoing conversations his death had catalyzed about authenticity in digital spaces. His foundation had expanded its mission to include advocacy for platform design changes that might reduce the psychological pressure on content creators, working with tech companies to implement features that de-emphasized virality in favor of sustainable creative practice and genuine connection. Jamal wanted to create music that moved people, not just content that generated likes, his mother often reminded audiences during Foundation's events. His death forced us to confront uncomfortable questions about what we value and why, questions that remain urgently relevant as technology continues to shape how we express ourselves and connect with others. In this way, the tragedy that had unfolded in a luxury Miami high-rise had transcended its immediate circumstances to become part of a larger conversation about identity, authenticity, and the sometimes deadly consequences when digital performance consumes reality. A thoroughly modern cautionary tale for a society still grappling with the psychological implications of lives increasingly lived online, where the boundary between the person and the persona grows ever more permeable and the pressure to maintain the illusion ever more intense.